Scheme of my today's presentation is that I'll look at Africa as a region at a glance and covering its historical timeline or power play in that region. And I'll be very slightly focusing on conflicts in the East African region, followed by statistics, basic facts, and Pakistan's embassies in East African region. Importance of East African region in the 21st century, the rising East African region, and a very important facet of my talk will be 21st century and neo-colonialism in the East African region. Last but not least, China's footprint and investments in East Africa perhaps will be much more important for all of us. I will be looking that in the overall context of important actors in East Africa and their roles, but my main focus will be China. And then, of course, last but not least, way forward for Pakistan, what we can do in East African region. Well, if I look at East African region, it comprises 19 countries and 5 subdivisions. On top of that is East African community, which is comprising Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. Mind it, South Sudan is also included in Nile Valley. So even in this slide, I have taken South Sudan at 2 places. One, of course, is in East African community because it has become member of East African community recently, but it is, of course, located far away. Second is Northern East Africa, which is also known as Horn of Africa. It comprises of Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. And there are 4 Indian Ocean islands, Comoros, Madagascar, Mauritius, and Seychelles. And there is also Southeastern Africa, comprising Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and Nile Valley, Sudan, and South Sudan. So it is a fairly large area, geographical area. If you have a look at this map, it starts from Eritrea and it comes down to Mozambique, and the other side is Zimbabwe and island of Madagascar. So 19 countries having a lot of space in the African continent. I will be giving you very quickly timeline to sensitize the viewers that what this region has been in the past. So you just keep in mind that the entire Africa, including Eastern African region, was primarily used as trade routes. If I start from the second, even before Islam, if I go back to antiquity and talk about Greek era, even there was a very clear trade route to Somalia, India, and the Red Sea, and Greeks were mostly navigating this land. But of course, after the advent of Islam, even in the 1614 before Hijrah, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon, sent his envoy Jafar ibn Abi Talib to the Christian king Najashi in Ethiopia, which was then called Habsha. And then subsequently, many preachers and traders were sent to Somalia, and they had 2 purposes, main purposes. One, of course, to carry the message of Islam and also to carry out trade on these routes. In the 7th century, Islam reaches Shanga and Pate Island near Kenya. Mind, these 2 are islands in Kenya. So starting from Somalia, which is on the top, coming down to the 7th century, when they traveled down, I have shown you the map, coming to the eastern tip of Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Zambia, and Zimbabwe. In the 9th century, Arab traders mostly traded with Somalia, Kenya, Mozambique, and Zanzibar near Tanzania. Zanzibar used to be a separate state in the past, but since 1964, it has become now part of Tanzania. It is a semi-autonomous entity which has its own president and prime minister, but it is under the overall control of Tanzanian government. In the 11th century, Arab traders consolidated their hold and presence in Zanzibar, which became hub of trade, which I'll be touching upon subsequently. And barter trade with the Persian Gulf was undertaken from there. In the mid 20th to 15th century, which is called Shirazi era, Shiites from the Persian Gulf ruled Lamu, Pemba, Mafia, Zanzibar, Comoro Islands, and Kilwa. These are all states, parts of Tanzania and Kenya. And they had also their trade with India, the Persian Gulf, and even Italy in Venice, because Italy was also an important trade route in the Red Sea, connecting Africa with Europe. Okay, from 1498 to 1698, that is a period of exactly 200 years, the Portuguese had their overwhelming influence in East African region. They navigated to Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique by sea. It was a time when Vasco da Gama, much earlier in 1498, also navigated the sea, and Portugal has direct trade between India, Far East, East Africa, and Portuguese took control from Arabs of spice trade, minded, when I say Arabs, mostly Shirazis and of course Omanis. And then they consolidated their colonial rule, and interestingly, this Portuguese colonial rule was spread from Morocco down to Japan and even covering Brazil. So look at their outreach. It was not only Morocco, it was Mozambique, Cape Town in South Africa, Oman, India, and even coastal line of Pakistan, Gwadar and Thatta, and India in Goa and Philippines, Japan. And I mean, look at the territory which this colonial power, which was predominantly taking control of East Africa in those days by their gunpowder and navigational skills, ruled that part of the East African region for more than 200 years. Then at a later stage, there were also conflict between Ottoman Empire and Portuguese, and there was even some wars for the Indian Ocean control fought in 1538 and 1559. It was a time when we can say that Christianity versus Islam was at conflict in this part of the world. In 1962, the Portuguese lost their control on Hormuz, which was initially under the control of the Iranians, the Persians, and in 1650, they lost their control on Muscat to Amman, which was also a part of Portuguese Empire at one point in time. They took back that control. And you know, Portuguese were gradually losing their control over this territory. Well, the Omani rule is quite interesting. When I was looking at this, look at the timeline, 1652 to 1964, more than 3 centuries. More than 3 centuries, Omanis ruled this part of the world. And Zanzibar was the main seat of their influence. Believe me, any one of you, if gets an opportunity to go to Zanzibar in your lives, go there and see the beauty of Zanzibar, its coastal line, its topography, its people. Say 99.9% are Muslims, and typical Muslims from the soil, and also typical Muslims from Oman, Iran, and other Muslim countries which came there and settled there. Zanzibar is a fascinating potpourri, or offers you the best opportunity to see remnants of the Muslim civilizations in the past. So Omani rule from Zanzibar, when they also controlled Pate and Kilwa. And Zanzibar became the main trading hub. And skyline and sea line are so beautiful that even afterwards, the colonial powers were fascinated and they used this land, this coastal line, not only for their trade route, but also for slave trade. And an important facet of Zanzibar was plantation of spices. Garam masale jo hum istemal karte hain, all spices were grown in two parts of the world. One, of course, was Indonesia, Java, where I also had opportunity to serve as deputy head of mission in Pakistan Embassy. And in Zanzibar was their second route, and they were so rich by selling these spices. Itself is a fascinating history of selling spices to the entire world, and even coming down to India or going up to West, or you think of that, and this slave trade and plantation of spices and export of spices was on the rise. Well, in 1939, the Omani power consolidated in Zanzibar by a very important figure, Sayyid Said, and in 1840, even he shifted his capital from Oman to Zanzibar. So Zanzibar became capital of Oman for fairly long time. I think perhaps there are one or two countries in the world. One is Portugal. They once shifted their capital to Rio de Janeiro, and likewise, Omani were so. Yes, Omanis learned from Portuguese experience in navigation and seafarer that they shifted their capital to Zanzibar, and it became such a rich territory in terms of trade and relations and navigation that there are novels and stories and books written on that. And each study itself is a complete study of the area and a civilization. Well, this trade continued, especially slave trade continued, so as long the colonial powers wanted to have slaves to be exported or transported to the United States of America or Europe. Once they had their plate full, then they had their own rules to stop that slave trade. And in 1876, the British ended slave trade, and the Omanis' rule remained in that part of Zanzibar till 1964 under the patronage of the USA, Britain, and France, because Zanzibar then was a separate state, and these countries had their own embassies and consulates in Zanzibar, and Omanis alone could not rule that part, and they required patronage of these Western powers.
The last Sultan of Oman and Zanzibar has moved back this last year.
Yes. 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 So likewise, in East African region, a lot of work was done by missionaries. They went there as philanthropists, undertaking some welfare projects for humanity or poor people. And then it turned into commercial projects. And finally, it became imperialist designs and ventures of the rulers. And then during the colonial era in the 19th and 20th century, East African region became theater of competition between the big powers, the British Empire, France, Germany, and this was unfortunately the time when Africa was scrambled into small pieces. If you just have a look at the Africa's map, you will not find a normal map. It seems perhaps someone has taken a ruler to draw lines to divide Africa into squares, boxes, and these are not normal geographical divisions of Africa. So this is also a historical part of Africa as a total continent, East African region as well. In 1885, Germans established East Africa Company, like the British established British East India Company in India. So this was overlap of colonial powers having their control in Asia and Africa, whether we talk about British rule or the African rule. So most of our countries have similar destinies, that we became the colonies and they became the rulers. It continued for a fairly long time. In 1886, the Anglo-German agreement divided mainland Mombasa. This Mombasa, Kilimanjaro, the Lake Victoria are part of Kenya. So it was divided as a separate part, and Tanzania became also as a separate part under the British control. And this division was artificial. This was not natural division, because look at Kilimanjaro is both some part in Tanzania, some in Kenya. Likewise, some safari parks are some part were given to Kenya, some to Tanzania. So this was artificial division, and control was British. And finally, it continued for a fairly long time. In 1819, British also took control of Uganda, and 1891, Tanganyika, some of perhaps you may know, Tanganyika is the old name of Tanzania, was under German patronage. It was also under British patronage. It also became part of German patronage. In 1895, Kenya went to British Protectorate and Crown Colony in 1920. In 1920, Britain captured the German holdings under British mainland. So my main point is, look at this scramble of East African countries, the way divide and rule was done and undertaken as a divine or sacred venture for them, which was of course very unfair division of these parts of Africa. Because I can't see the screen, these are some of the conflicts, very important conflicts, which several East African countries were riven with protracted conflicts, political coups, the world. So this is unfortunate history of the East African region. Let me give you very quickly some basic facts of East African region. This is the most populous region of Africa. And there are three different income levels. Middle income countries are Zambia and Zimbabwe, and high income countries are Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Uganda. And the poorest countries in the world are also situated in the East African region. These are Burundi, Comoros, Djibouti, Eritrea, and which are located in the Horn of Africa and Great Lakes region. Most of East African people practice either Christianity or Islam, which I'll show in my next slide. But there are more than 160 tribes in Ethiopia, Somalia, and Djibouti, which speak the Afro-Asiatic languages. The Swahili is widely spoken language in Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. So it was passed that 160 tribes were having their control in these small countries. Coming to this slide, which provides you basic data, believe me, I took a lot of time to prepare this slide to cut things into a capsule form for you. This is a list of 19 African countries in East Africa region. If you look at the population, the total population of this area is 488 million people, and the most populous is Ethiopia. And second one is in terms of population, Tanzania. Third is Kenya. And the smallest one, if I go to number 19, is Seychelles Island, which is less than 100,000 people. In terms of real GDP, the total GDP of these 19 countries, as per figures of 2020, was US $433 billion. Believe me, here I will stop you for a while. Whenever I look at Africa and small countries, my take is that Pakistan is and Pakistan should be at the giving end. 19 countries having a total GDP of 433 billion, Pakistan alone is a country which is having 200 billion rupees dollars GDP. If that is the case, we should always be thinking how we can contribute or stand with this region or Africa as a continent. At places we have very strong equation for cooperation and showing our solidarity or standing with the African regions. Well, per capita income, I will not touch too much because that is just a comparison that if Seychelles is having the maximum per capita income, then if you look at the 19 number, which is Burundi, $263, that shows the difference in terms of income. In ease of doing business, whenever we think or talk about what we should, how we should increase our presence in Africa, what is the ease of doing business in African countries? Very quickly, this is the graph. Most of the countries are in 3 digits. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4 countries which are in double digit in terms of doing business. Smaller number offer more opportunities or ease of doing business. And if a country is standing at 166 or 140 or 171 or 185 or 190 number, there is not that ease of doing business in those countries. So whenever we think about opening of our relations with African countries, we should be mindful which countries offer the best opportunities and how we can avail of these opportunities in our overall scheme of engagement with Africa. Well, I was making this slide for you that what is Muslim population in these countries. Interestingly, if you look at Comoros, Comoros is having 98.3% Muslims. Djibouti is 97%. Eritrea is 51%. Sudan is 97%. Somalia is 99.8%. So most of these countries, 5 are over 50%, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries are close to 97, 98, 98% Muslim population, which is not a small mean number. On this side, if you look, these 6 of them are members of OIC states. So these are Muslim countries with whom we should always be thinking how we can develop our relationship in terms of Engage Africa. They are important members not only in OIC, but also in United Nations General Assembly. So working along with them, standing along with them can provide us better opportunities for Pakistan's cooperation and relationship in this region or in this continent. I have already touched the ranking in their economy, but if I cannot see on top of this, the last slide is that right now we have 9 embassies in East African regions. When I say 9, let me be very clear that green ones were established before the incumbent government took over control. These 6 embassies were already there. And in 2020, the incumbent government announced to open 5 new embassies. And this one was, Djibouti was announced then in 2020. Djibouti has not yet been functional, though a decision has been made to start our embassy, because this is technical thing. Opening of an embassy has to fulfill certain obligations and formalities for acquiring land or properties, or sending their skeleton stuff in the beginning and then established a complete setup for starting an embassy and then finally making it functional. So out of these, the Rwanda is the only country where our embassy has already started. At Rwanda, 11. Yes, Rwanda, this credit goes to the incumbent government that Rwanda has become functional. And rest, of course, we are working. We have nominated ambassadors for Djibouti and also Ghana. Even they have gone to their places of posting, but they are still in the process of establishing embassies. So I take it for granted. There are only 11 or 12 African countries embassies in Pakistan. And I can tell you, if from this list, yes, if you ask me, Kenya, yes. Sudan, yes. Uganda, no. So there are total 12 African embassies working in Islamabad, in Pakistan. And out of these, I can see only three or four. So we are still in a better position to claim that 9 embassies, out of which 7 are already working, 2 are going to work shortly, and only 10 countries out of this whole region are accredited, whereas most of African countries are accredited in terms, Pakistan embassy is looking 2 to 3 or 4, 5 African countries. In that way, East African region is a better region. That right now there are only 10 accredited embassies. You can say 60-40. But of course, number is increasing. Once 2 more become functional, then okay. We can always explore India's status. Okay, so this slide perhaps provide the basic information on East African region. Okay, let me touch upon quickly on importance of East African region in the 21st century. In the era of globalization, there is gradual shift from communism and socialism to capitalism even in Africa. When I say capitalism, this is not purely capitalism in Western terms. It is a mix of socialist capitalism and Western capitalism, because actors in that area right now are pulling on both ways. China is an important player along with others, which I'll touch upon shortly. But this land is very rich in natural resources, minerals, oil and gas reserves, bauxite, diamonds, gold, iron ore. It is also the world's key producer of coffee, cocoa, cotton, and rubber. So they have got enormous reserves. Some of them are already tapped. Some of them are under process, but still enormous reserves are to be extracted and tapped and taken benefit of. So who is going to take that role? China is one important player along with others. Let us see how it is going to work in the longer run. In terms of regional cooperation, there are 3 very important regional organizations in this region: East African Community, South African Community, and Common Market for East and South Africa. These are now interacting and cooperating amongst themselves in a better way, which was not the case in the past. Even when I was there in Tanzania, we used to talk, EAC is not cooperating with SADC and not COMISA, but now the latest update which I have got for making this presentation is there is going to be very close cooperation among these regional organizations. And that becomes under the overall framework of African Continental Free Trade Area, which mind is again the brainchild of the Chinese. They initiated that in Africa. And under that Africa Continental Free Trade Area, these regional organizations in East African region are also becoming active and robust. This region is still offering a mix of relative stability and lawlessness. We cannot say these are safe, secure in terms of human security or overall security, navigation security, sea lanes, border areas. It is mixed. Some areas are stable, some are less stable, some are vulnerable more to risks. Because there are conflict zones, still conflicts are very much there in Republic of Congo, in Burundi, Mozambique, Rwanda, and Uganda. And this is also something unfortunate that dictators of these countries, Burundi, Ethiopia, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Uganda gained power following armed insurgencies. And that is a new normal still working there on the ground. If I talk about challenges, there are a number of challenges still on the fore. Amongst these are terrorism, security issues, piracy, abject poverty. Abject poverty is my key word, which is to be understood even in that main basic data slide, that there are different developmental areas, low income, middle income, high income, even with this group, and uneven models of development are still there. But 21st century is an era of neo-colonialism, which is antithesis to colonialism. Colonialism was to go and grab some lands, loot and plunder and take back raw materials to your countries and establish, consolidate and strengthen your own country's economies. This was in colonial era, but in neo-colonialism now focus is shifted from that sort of mindset to engagement with these countries. And major players right now in East African region are United States, Great Britain, France, European Union, and China I have put in bold because for me, China is perhaps much more and crucially important. And even India, Turkey, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and some others are also there. Even in this division, the United States is primarily looking from the security prism, terrorism, anti-piracy. Likewise, Great Britain, France, and European countries, European Union countries are also focusing how to control under the garb of terrorism and less economic engagement and more security engagement. China is the only country which is focusing 100% in terms of economic engagement with Africa. And there are different areas which I'll be touching upon quickly before coming to the conclusion of my talk, so that you can have a better understanding. And if you can, what sort of neo-colonial cooperation is, using it as an economic lever under globalization, cultural cooperation, people-to-people contacts, and aid or assistance to the countries instead of previous colonial practices of imperialism or direct political control. Rising East Africa, if I just give you a look, Kenya and Ethiopia are the two elite and fastest growing developed models in this region. And now under Chinese influence, economic engagement, transport corridors are being established, and they are renovating. This port of Dar es Salaam is in Tanzania. They are also establishing a new port at Bagamoyo in Tanzania, but I have read for the time being, the work is stopped on the project. There are certain problems going on, but this is a deep water port in Bagamoyo. which is primarily like, our Port Qasim, and Karachi port is too congested. For decongestion, they are establishing a new port under Chinese, Tanzanians, and Omanis are the three main stakeholders in this project of Port Bagamoyo. In Kenya, the port of Mombasa, they are building a new container terminal which will improve traffic towards the Great Lake districts. And construction has started on another deep water port in Lamu, which is in Kenya, and it will connect South Sudan with Ethiopia and will link Kenya with South Sudan, Uganda to Ethiopia as well. So this is vast connectivity in terms of ports. There are also vast gas and oil reserves found in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. I was in Tanzania when they were talking about finding of new reserves of oil and gas, especially gas. And Chinese were coming day in and day out to chip in their different projects related to gas. So these different gas pipelines, new refineries are going to transform East African region to an extent where they can have a better model of development. And that is why that East African countries, especially in East African community, they are looking more for public-private partnership instead of government-owned. Okay. Well, let me come to my foster child, China, which is always my special area of interest. And this is why Naufal Shahrukh Saab is also encouraging us to focus more on China's footprint in Africa and how Pakistan, China, and Africa can cooperate in a better way. So these few slides will enlighten you on that aspect of China's footprint, our presence, our assistance program, our investments in Africa, from where we can take lead to cooperate with China and to carry out certain joint ventures or projects in East African region or in the entire African continent. China's FDI in Africa started in the 1950s, soon after their independence. And by early 1990s, China could invest only in 102 projects in Africa. And it was very minimal, small amount of 51 million US dollars. And Chinese say it with their pride. And it was my experience while serving in Tanzania when I used to meet Chinese ambassador. I say, you are coming up very prominently in Africa, in East Africa. I said, no. We are just trying. And this is Chinese policy, hide and bide. Hide yourself, don't declare what you are doing, and bide. Bide means buy your time to show it to the world. And Chinese ambassador always used to say to me, no, ambassador, we are coming in our own way. And we are still the fastest developing country, the largest developing countries, and we will take years and years. But look at, if in 1950s their investment was just $51 million, in 1998, they adopted going out policy, which is also called looking outside, look at the world from Chinese perspective, socialist characteristics. Opening to the outside world with Chinese characteristic was their slogan. And they started going out of China. In 1950, they were sitting in China and going less to Africa or other countries. But in 1998, opening to the outside world in Deng Xiaoping's era started, and they focused on Africa. And they started their focus on ports and terminals. In 2006, China launched Africa policy as a very aggressive policy under which they offered preferential loans, preferential buyer credits, to promote investments, They invested a lot in infrastructure, construction projects, transportation, communications, mining, and extraction of raw materials and water conservancy and electricity. And even up to 2007, China's investment increased just to $1.57 billion in Africa. When I say East Africa, I'm talking about East Africa. But in 2013, when Chinese President Xi Jinping became to power, I remember I was in Tanzania. The first visit which he made, he started with Russia. Second leg was Tanzania. Third was South Africa. And fourth was the Republic of Congo. And while standing there in Chinese-built new parliament of Tanzania, he gave his blueprint and action plan how China is going to engage with Africa in the next 3 decades, up till 2050. So this was his vision. And as a result of President Xi Jinping's visit, which first one was in 2013, he made 4 visits altogether till today. So this is what I called leadership diplomacy. If you want to cultivate good relationship with any country, that starts from the top. Leadership engagements, leadership diplomacy, which Xi Jinping started in 2013, and he made first visit to Africa. And he announced even at that time that we are going to start CPEC and Belt and Road Initiative. And consequently, as a result of that drive, foreign direct investment from China increased to US $57.24 billion in 2030. And in 2019, China's foreign direct investment in Africa reduced to 44 billion. That there are reasons for that. And reasons is situation in Libya and other African countries. They were slowing down their presence there. But then in 2019, US was #1 in terms of foreign direct investment. It was 78 billion. UK was #2, 65 billion. And France was #3, 53 billion. But look at this, this slide. From 2016 to 2020, foreign direct investment from China to Africa reached to $200 billion. And by 2017, China's total investment in African ports amounted to 25 billion, which was covering 24 ports in 20 African countries. And China's port foreign direct investment was mostly in the east and west coast, and mostly along with area which we are talking about. Some was on the western coast, but also mostly on the eastern coast. And these are just figures to show you how much China invested in these special regions, in West Africa, in East Africa, in North Africa, in South Africa. And China also established their first overseas naval base, which was built in Djibouti, is a separate story to be told. And I'm not taking more time on that. That is why I put just 2 asterisks and gone down. And China's development assistance, I was amazed to look at that the maximum investment which they made was in Tanzania-Zambia Railway on top of that. And second was their African Union Conference Center, second largest investment. And rest, 80 large-scale power plants, 13,000 kilometers of roads and railways. It is not a mean achievement for a single country like China. And interestingly, it will be also informative for you that China has been Africa's largest trading partner for the last 12 years, starting from 2009. And annual trade between China and African countries is over $200 billion per annum. I'll just give you quickly these slides that Right now in 2019, China is investing in African ports. 46 ports are one way or the other under Chinese financing. Some of them are look, 11 ports are operated by the Chinese, and these are in East Africa, Central Africa, and West Africa. Fourteen ports are financed or constructed by the Chinese entities. 10 ports are financed or constructed by the Chinese in different regions. And 11 ports are again financed or constructed by the Chinese entities in different regions. So altogether 46 ports are either constructed, financed, or controlled, or operated. And this is the network of ports now being operated, funded, are run by the Chinese. The entire Africa, starting from South Africa up to Mauritania, East Coast, West Coast, and all coastal line is under Chinese control. What could be the possible options? Are Pakistan or way forward? That is also equally more important. Well, in 2020, the government of Pakistan announced East of Engage Africa policy, under which, apart from a number of other incentives, the government announced to open 5 embassies in Djibouti, Rwanda, Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Uganda. So far, only 1 embassy has been opened in Rwanda. Ambassadors have been appointed to Djibouti and Ghana, but embassies are yet to be made functional. Embassies have not yet been opened in Ivory Coast and Uganda. These are to be opened soon, way forward. And if you take my word, in all embassies in Africa, whether we are talking about East African region or rest of African continent, we must and we should immediately appoint commercial counselors in all Pakistan missions in Africa, so that we can start doing business with them in a much more professional way. And I have already touched upon leadership diplomacy is the key to open new areas and vistas of cooperation with the African states. Unfortunately, Africa was not in our political radar, and even in the present government's more than 3 years term, there is no leadership visit both ways. No Pakistani leader has gone to Africa, nor an African leader has come to Pakistan. Believe me, that is part of my next talk on Pakistan-Tanzania relations. In 3.5 years, I tried my level best to take Pakistan President and Prime Minister on 5 occasions to Tanzania. And I made my best effort from top to toe, and even spoke to the highest authorities in Islamabad. For God's sake, this is an opening, arrange that leadership visit so that we can have better relationship with Tanzania, which is a very important country in East Africa. Unfortunately, it did not materialize. Let us hope that leadership diplomacy starts sooner than later. Only then we can open up Africa for Pakistan. Then, of course, parliamentary exchanges, speakers, chairman, Senate's visit. There are a few parliamentary exchanges. Some delegations have come from African countries. One was, I think, Djibouti. 1 or 2 more, only 2, 3, I remember. African parliamentary delegations came to Pakistan, but none of our side went there. So we have also to look into that option. We need to augment government to government, business to business, and people to people relations. The order in case of China is now reverse. They say people to people first, then government to business, and then government to government. So if they have reversed the order, we are nowhere to even think of that. We can even start it from G to G, B to B, and P to P. Okay. What could be the way out? Invitations to all East African regions leaders to visit Pakistan from President and Prime Minister. And then it was part of the incumbent government's policy that we will be meeting the African leaders at the United Nations General Assembly, OIC meetings, and World Economic Forum in Davos. There are only a far and few interaction between our leadership at United Nations General Assembly, are a few at OIC platform, but none has taken place at World Economic Forum, which we have to, in terms of trade and investment and more economic cooperation, we need to also engage with them, with African leaders in World Economic Forum at Davos. Then meetings of our Chief of Army Staff and the African counterparts at Munich Security Conference, which is an annual event. They can go and meet there. Instead of waiting, of course, that opportunity can be availed of. And then, of course, invitations to the African defense ministers and senior officials to IDEAS, which is a biannual event in Pakistan, invite them, and then establish Pakistan's new embassies in conflict-riven African states, where Pakistan has already deployed its troops under UN peacekeeping force. And it will be a way to earn more goodwill or enhance goodwill in these strife-riven areas and conflict zones, where Pakistan has already a footing and made a lot of contribution. I was amazed to read a report that in the Republic of Congo, the first Pakistani woman contingent is providing best services, from medical services to physiotherapy to all medical care and nurses and doctors. A complete unit of Pakistani women officers are now placed in the Republic of Congo to offer their services. So we have to strengthen that foothold, that footprint, by even opening embassies. Rwanda, we have already started, I am glad, which was a conflict-driven area. We have already started in Rwanda. But of course, Congo is also hugely rich in natural resources and minerals. It is better to start there. Angola for that matter, which of course is not in East African region, in center, but very important conflict region, country where we can start our embassy. And then we have to allocate more. Look, Pakistan has a niche in its certain areas. One, of course, we were best partners of Africa when they were getting independence. Then in UN peacekeeping force. Then number 3, capacity building. Whatever we have done in the capacity building, we have to not only double, but increase it at least to 10 times to offer them more seats, vacancies in our universities, educational institutions, and private sector, and armed forces institutions, foreign service academy, and likewise all that capacity building opportunities to be provided to them. And Pakistan should always be having a feeling that we are at the giving end in case of Africa. Most of African countries, unfortunately, are still very poor, facing the worst scenario, the worst poverty. How we can pull them up? Let us start with leadership level visits, both ways, bringing it down to this level where we are giving them, offering them. And then also arrange interministerial meetings, which is unfortunately my experience while working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have a group of interministerial meeting for cooperation with Africa, which is having a lukewarm approach, which is dormant. We have to activate that group, interministerial meetings. And then we have also to establish a monitoring cell at the Prime Minister's office to look at relationship between Pakistan and African states. And my last slide, bullet is robust cooperation with China, Turkey, and UAE in Africa. Let us follow the footsteps of China, join hands and heads with Chinese, and find certain meeting grounds for having better cooperation, interaction, engagement, economic diplomacy, and political footprint. All that is doable. And I have been given to understand that Chinese are ready and willing to do that. If they are, why are not we? So I leave it at this question mark. Thank you so very much.
So much, Ambassador Tajamul Altaf, for a very comprehensive and enlightening presentation, although it took a long time, an hour and a half perhaps, but it was so enlightening, so interesting that we were captivated. I don't think many questions are left unanswered, but if there are any, try to be brief. The floor is open. Yes. Any questions online?
Yes, sir. Assalamu alaikum, sir. I have one question, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Please introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
My name is Irfan Amir. I'm a third year social sciences student at Federal Urdu University of Karachi. I have one question from sir, that what is your take on the issue of Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which has become a hot conflict between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia? And my second question is that, as you have mentioned, new colonialism. Do you believe that China is also becoming a new colonialist state? Because as recently Uganda's airport, international airport, as reports were coming that Uganda's airport was being controlled China, but both the parties denied. What do you think, sir?
Yes, both are very important questions. The second one is directly related to today's talk. That control of airport, Uganda, it was a fake news, spread, and you have yourself corrected it. There was second version also coming from the Chinese, and they have even given the details of their engagement with Uganda for the running of this airport, and they denied any sort of mishandling or high-handedness. These both reports are readily available. I'm sure you have gone through. And my take is, yes, China is a country which is no doubt in terms of neo-colonialism is increasing its footprint, but just mind and bear in your mind that China's approach, even in this new colonialism, is not having any remnant of colonialism for me. And I take them as very clear-headed, a nation which is carrying with them more than 5,000 years of history, 5,000 years of wisdom and philosophy, Confucius thoughts, and they know how to deal with the world after having 4 wonderful decades of rapidly growing economy, rising economy, and becoming the second largest economy in the world. And now looking at the second half of this century, 2050, by which they want to acquire certain milestones and goals. And in this race, for a moment, if they think to become a colonial power or a new colonialist like the past colonialists, then it will be the beginning of China's decline. This is not the case. The Chinese are very shrewd, clear-headed, wise people, and their engagement with Africa is based on certain very clear parameters. One is solidarity, and that solidarity is like-minded countries in Africa which were poor, which were communist, socialist, those who were nowhere close to capitalistic forces. So Chinese were helping them all along soon after their independence till today. Second was cooperation, which Chinese say win-win cooperation, which is good for me, should also be good for you. And there is myth of debt trap, which the Chinese have denied by facts and figures, and we should go to hard data, or we should research that data where Chinese come up with facts and figures, how much we have provided in terms of funds, assistance, FDI, and what we are gaining out of that other than goodwill. Of course, just look, 54 countries in Africa, if they stand with China in return to all that help, assistance, FDI, and support and trade which China has undertaken, they can have their own votes in China's favor, even in United Nations. And this is what is the China's strategic aim for me. And Chinese are very clear-headed to achieve that. So let us not take that it will be exactly a policy to grab Chinese African resources. They are very clear-headed and they will go in that direction. As regards your first question, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia's conflict, that is a mix of internal and external influences, which unfortunately is still not dying down or settling down. But of course, there is an overplay of national, regional, and international factors, which will still take some time to settle down. Thank you.
Yes. Any more questions? No one online? No, I don't think there are any online questions. Ji?
4 या 5 कंट्रीज हैं जिनकी मोर देन 90% पॉपुलेशन है मुस्लिम। तो जो एक्सपेंशन ऑफ इस्लाम इन अफ्रीका ये क्या पीसफुल है? हमने मलेशिया और इंडोनेशिया के बारे में पढ़ते हैं कि 100% पीसफुल एक्सपेंशन ऑफ इस्लाम, तो यहाँ पे किस तरह हुई है? क्योंकि अरब ट्रेडर्स का तो आपने जिक्र किया, लेकिन इसके अलावा भी क्या कोई फैक्टर्स हैं वहाँ पे? थैंक यू सो मच।
Yes, an important question, expansion of Islam in Africa. No doubt, as you have mentioned, historically speaking, very peaceful expansion of Islam. And it was both for preaching and trade, very successful model of Islam. And if you talk about the second half of the last century, there were changes, ripple impacts of certain forces coming into play. And after 9/11, yes, of course, there was pull and push factor, which we find even Asia, in the Middle East, and in also Africa, because there was an overlapping of certain trends being carried out, not only in our part of the world, but in Africa as well, in Middle East as well. And you name them, and I can safely say that overall it was a peaceful expansion, but at places it certainly was not peaceful expansion of Islam. And certain trends like extremism or terrorism, or for that matter, different cultures related to Islam were in the vogue. And one can safely say, if I look at Africa, Africa became a hub of certain tendencies. Even we talk about, say, certain terrorist organizations, one even in Nigeria, Boko Haram, and Daesh, even in the Middle East, their footprint was there. So if that was a universal or international tendency under which we found that some factors of expansion of Islam were not exactly the way Westerners or you and I look at, perhaps there was room for that sort of tendencies, which still are going on. But let me also make a point here. Amongst all these trends and tendencies, overwhelming impacts were coming from all over the world. So on the one hand, West was playing its own role. On the other hand, nations were also playing their own role. Middle Eastern countries were also playing their own role. So in a nutshell, to handle this rather sensitive question, I can only answer to your question. Islam is mostly a peaceful religion. There are sometimes certain tendencies which are taken by different lenses and prisms by the onlooker, are the one who interprets or expounds. And as a result, some sort of tendencies don't seem to be peaceful. Thank you.
Ji, Inam sir.
So I have a question. As you have mentioned or shown in your presentation that among other challenges, there is a threat of terrorism there as well in East Africa region. So don't you think that because we also live in this region and we also are also facing this threat of terrorism here, a new way of terrorism in the shape of Daesh or, you know, like that. So don't you think that this point can become a converging point between Pakistan and East African region and can bring these two regions closer to each other?
Excellent question. And yes, I have even study on that. Unfortunately, after 9/11, American embassy in Kenya and Tanzania were attacked. And there was colossal loss as a result of these two terrorist attacks on these two embassies in East Africa. And of course, from 9/11 onward, there was a very clear understanding between Pakistan and East African countries and also some other African states to converge their preparations to start combined, to take some certain concerted and combined actions, collective efforts. Some of them was sending of our naval ships there, and also intelligence sharing. Also, some sort of cooperation to contain and contest the rise of extremism or terrorism. And certain very clear proposals were taken by East African countries and Pakistan, and we were giving them support, and we are still doing that. And we must, because at the end of the day, if that is the stake for the entire world, Daesh today is working here, tomorrow, yesterday they were in Africa. And I remember President Obama was on record to say, when they say that we are controlling Taliban in Afghanistan, but their splinters are now moving from Afghanistan to such and such country in Africa. And their control will be in Africa. And then from Africa, they will be going to the Middle Eastern countries. So this is some sort of manipulation which keep on going. And like-minded countries are those who have their shared interest, are factors where they want to cooperate, can always join heads and hands and continue that sort of cooperation where we can offer our best experiences in handling and combating terrorism in our part of the world, and share our best experiences with those states, which Pakistan is always ready to do that. So naturally, that is an important area. And you have raised a very valid point that we are already doing, and we have to muster up that cooperation in the future as well.
Sure, we can
क्या नाम?
Dr. Bakar
जी डॉक्टर
Dr. Bakar Najamuddin, if you are here with us, we would like to request you to say a few words on this talk so far.
He doesn't seem to be there.
Okay.
Sir, my question is about the conflict or war in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. For some, it is a conflict with historical root causes. Some sees it as a conflict fueled by US and European Union to destabilize the region that is near to the strategic port of Djibouti. What is your take on it?
Ashfaq, I think this question has already been asked, and I have tried to amplify my views on that. But you have given answer yourself while talking about this conflict, not only regional, but also international. The overplay of interest of Europe and United States of America, and strong footprint of China coming in that part in Djibouti, especially. And this conflict is being flared up, for me, is being flared up by the outside actors more than the internals. So there is definitely conflict, Tigray and Ethiopia, it is going on the ground, but more influence is coming from outside. And for me, it can be a difficult contesting field or ground to even undermine the influence of China in that region. The way China is rising, some of actors don't want a very strong footprint of China in that part of the world in terms of Djibouti, which you have mentioned. So this strategic conflict will continue as part of international relations. That is not going to die down soon. Otherwise, I know this Ethiopia, Tigray and Sudan, they were at a very close meeting point to address their vital issues, which are now being complicated by these forces. And for me, it is going to be a long-drawn conflict. It's not going to settle like Rwanda, Burundi, or Congo so very soon, so early. So since it is a mix of the two overlapping forces, rather three on national, regional, and international. So it is going to be like that for how long? I cannot predict, but for me, it is going to be a long battle.
Thank you. I think there are no more questions. So let me express my gratitude to Ambassador Tajamul Saab once more and convey my